As a strength and conditioning coach with over a decade of experience working with professional athletes and holding a master's in sport and exercise science, I've worked with some of the toughest competitors in sport. But as an interesting thought exercise and the hype surrounding this fight, I thought I'd go into how I would train Mike Tyson to fight Jake Paul. I'm going to break down exactly how I'd structure his strength and conditioning for a fight like this. Now you might be thinking, Tyson's one of the greatest boxers of all time. Does this even matter? Does he need more strength conditioning? But the reality is, age is a bitch. And in this video, I'm gonna take you step by step through my 4-month process for getting Mike Tyson ready for this fight against Jake Paul, from periodization, strength training, conditioning, and I'll show you exactly what goes into this style of training. A lot of what I'll be talking about is how the programs are structured within the Sweet Science of Fighting Underground. So if you check that down in the description, there's also some freebies down there, the MMA and Jiu-Jitsu strength conditioning blueprints. Check those out. But to set the scene for the strength conditioning program, we need to make some assumptions about Mike Tyson. So he's 58 years old, a lot of mileage on the body from years of professional boxing and training. So we're gonna assume that he has general wear and tear. I have no idea about injuries or anything like that. So we're just gonna assume he has no current injuries stopping him from doing things. And we're just gonna say this is a 4-month preparation, just for the sake of this video. Now, these are likely the problems that I would assume that he has in preparation for this fight. The first one is likely a low endurance, can't repeatedly do work or repeat high intensity efforts. Again, he is older, he has put on some weight. I don't know his training history leading up to this, but I would assume his endurance is much lower than what it used to be. I would assume reduced speed and power from less training and from aging, which means he is, say, quote unquote, less twitchy or less fast twitch. Probably overall slightly detrained just from general lifestyle and not training as a professional athlete anymore. And probably needs more strength conditioning away from boxing, so more general style training due to his boxing mileage through his career. So adding more quote unquote specific modalities may not be what he needs just to get him away from more boxing. Now, I'm not going to give specific programs and exercises throughout this 4-month prep, because it's going to be completely individual to say what that schedule would look like. But I want to give an overarching view of how it would progress from month 4 to the last month for the fight. So let's start with month 1. Month 1 would be a somewhat blended strength and conditioning approach. And the biggest mistake that I've seen regarding the first month of strength conditioning for, doesn't matter if it's an athlete or a sports team, is throwing everything at once in the first month. You see it all the time within team sports, rugby, soccer, especially American football, where following some kind of testing, whether that's endurance, strength, whatever, it's just an absolute thrashing in that first week to quote unquote get them in shape for the season. However, you see dumbass coaches do this all the time and they don't have a team to work with by the time the season comes because everyone's injured. And one of my principles of training that I published on hammermedia.com is to increase volume and intensity together. It sounds counterintuitive because we typically look at volume and intensity with an inverse relationship. However, when we're starting that first month, we can't throw a boatload of volume and low intensity, and we can't do a boatload of intensity and low amount of volume. We want a low amount of both so we can gradually build throughout. So we're gonna start with in the gym. Again, a little bit blended in this one, so I'm just gonna break it down like this to make it a little easier. But essentially we're looking to build volume of short ground contact, extensive plyometrics, so essentially sub-maximal plyometrics in multiple directions. And then same thing with jumps. Volume of longer ground contact, extensive jumps, again in multiple directions. Some examples, jumping rope, ankle pops, jump squats, lateral jumps, etc. And I'm gonna take this piece from Verkhoshansky and how they describe a jump progression for progressing to drop and depth jumps, which I'll be doing a video soon. But they state that the compulsory condition of high performance is the capacity to relax muscles before and after takeoff movements. And I've talked a lot about being able to relax rapidly and the coordination around developing speed and power, which is what we're starting to achieve with these lower level jumps and plyometrics, being able to find that relaxed rhythm. Further, Verkhoshansky states that these exercises should be applied in such a way that a gradual increase in the athlete's explosive strength expressed in the landing and takeoff movements will be assisted by improvement of execution technique, more exactly by its gradual adjustment to the level of explosive strength increasing, which means we start these lower amplitude jumps and plyometrics, and as we progress, they become more intense as we're able to improve explosive strength, prepare the tendons and muscles for those more intense movements. So let's just That's why we start with this lower intensity jumps and plyometrics to build that volume, build that rhythm, and then we progress from there, especially with someone who has a lot of mileage on them. You can get great gains doing these, especially if you consider the podcast I did with Gary Hutt recently, where he has amateur boxers with no formal strength conditioning background coming into GB boxing and testing 4+ RSIs or reactive strength indexes without having done any formal strength conditioning training, just from the nature of the sport, being bouncy all the time, jumping a lot of rope, etc. As we move into more of the strength training routine, using a lot of oscillatory isometrics, starting in the first month in disadvantaged position. So oscillatory isometric is the contract relax, but without any of the ballistic action. So ballistic action is meaning we're leaving the ground or becoming a projectile. Oscillatory isometric is kind of just doing a rapid pulse up and down. An easy example would be a bench press. I'm just pulsing the bottom position from the chest part way up. For a split squat, it'll be the bottom position of a split squat, pumping up and down as quick as possible. And essentially you're just training the ability to contract and relax rapidly. Doing it in a disadvantaged position, in these bottom position squats, bottom position bench press, etc., also helps with improving mobility. So you get a kind of double whammy around that. Also be doing medicine ball circuits. And in my opinion, probably the most underused training modality for boxers or strikers MMA. It's full body conditioning with plenty of quote unquote boxing specific rotation and movement. So you can almost do more boxing without boxing. And this will be part of the low intensity steady state cardio that he'll be doing, which I'll touch on more in the conditioning section. But essentially we're doing medicine ball circuits, extensive throws against the wall, easy, smooth, rhythmic, and doing a variety of throws from different angles and different movements. For the maximal strength training portion, low volume, holding yielding isometrics. So for example, holding a loaded Bulgarian split squat. These are great for just general tendon health and developing strength in those positions. And then for just the general strength training lifts that he may or may not be able to do, using more specialty bars if available, because barbells, depending on the mileage you have, can be funny with elbows, shoulders, etc. So specialty bar lifts or dumbbells, etc., allow a little more degree of freedom to work around the weights. And then a philosophy I've picked up from Vern Gambetta, who was on the podcast a little while ago, you should definitely listen to that one, and Joel Smith in the Speed Strength book, is finishing with fast. And Vern always puts it as, the body always remembers the last thing you did. No scientific backing on any of this, but just a philosophy that he's held, and I think works well. And then Joel Smith kind of repeated that within his book as well, which I really like. So kind of connecting those dots. But finishing with fast means, maybe in the beginning of month one, might be jumping rope, might be doing some kind of throws or relatively easy jumps, or it could be coming to the conditioning portion of this month, where we're looking at sprint intervals with full recovery. And when we're talking sprints, we're not talking over the ground, talking something on a bike that's no impact, easy to get the intensity, not going to provide that soreness. So that could be an example of finishing with fast, doing a 6-second sprint, resting approximately 2 minutes. So a lot of rest, but just getting the idea of speed, producing force quickly, finishing a strength session with something. To further build on the conditioning, we're looking at building some kind of low intensity steady state, no impact, bike, rower, etc. The goal would be to not stick on one modality for the entire, session. Say it's 30 to 60 minutes. It will be, every 10 minutes, doing something different. Medicine ball circuit, then on the bike, then on the rower, etc. And I think that just gives, one, it makes it a little more less tedious. Two, because the conditioning effects so general, you can do anything to get that heart rate in those zones and you're good to go. Bit of full body conditioning effect too, just because you're doing different things. Now, this could be seen as a negative for an explosive fighter like Tyson. I mean, if we look at the evidence by Levin's PhD, I think I covered that in a video under muscle fiber type. And also Martin Boucher's opinion paper, we covered that in the podcast with Paul Larson. Lots of low intensity volume may be harder to recover from for fast twitch athletes. So you may be better skewing more towards the higher intensity side, but potentially that might not be the case if you're doing a lot of no impact exercise and changing the conditioning modality within that routine, like I mentioned before, doing multiple different modalities instead of just, for example, running. You may not have that same effect. Plus, in this context, I'm assuming Mike Tyson is relatively detrained, so we need some form of easy base work just to build volume before we push the intensity. So that's month one. Month two, in the gym, we're looking to transition to more maximal jumps and plyometrics. These will be done body weight. Easy examples: box jump, single leg hurdle pops, broad jumps if possible. Again, depends on the knees. This follows on our progression for improving that ability to contract and relax. Same thing with medicine ball throws, start to transition into more maximal medicine ball throws. It doesn't mean we don't do any extensive work. It just means that we start to incorporate some of these more maximal throws into maximal rotational throws, punish throws, overhead throws, etc. We continue on the oscillatory isometrics. It's almost like our bridge between doing our main initial, say, jump plyometric throw work, our bridge into our strength training routine of these oscillatory isometrics that are getting us that speed with no impact. And then again, we go into our low volume maximal strength training. Now we can transition to more, say, overcoming isometrics, so maximal pushing for 6 to 8 seconds. Again, using our specialty bars, dumbbells, etc. for our main strength work. Low volume. I'm not talking about doing a bunch of squats, benches, deadlifts, etc. I'm talking like maybe 1 to 2 top sets of one upper and one lower exercise. Just enough to stimulate those maximal strength adaptations that we're looking for, such as targeting type 2 muscle fibers, improving agonist or prime mover muscle activation, etc. For conditioning, we can continue with these sprint intervals at the end of, say, a session because we're finishing fast, but now we might be doing it on the minute, just in this one. You're still getting adequate recovery if you're doing 6 seconds, but we're starting to bring that rest time slightly down. We'll still continue a little bit of that low intensity steady state cardio through medicine ball circuits, allowing us to increase that boxing volume without boxing. Again, we can still do rowing, cycling, etc. But because that low intensity stuff is starting to be pulled back, we can start to look at intensifying some of the aerobic work, or quote unquote aerobic work, with long and short high intensity intervals. So we're looking at anywhere from 1 to 1 to 3 to 1 work to rest. Just some random guidelines here, above 85% max heart rate or using 90 to 110% maximal aerobic speed. For example, 60 seconds on, 30 seconds off, 90 on, 30 off, 40 on, 20 off, 30 on, 30 off, 15 on, 15 off, etc. So just working within those ranges and you can get enough work done with that. And that'll be how that looks. So within the gym, we're looking about twice a week, month 1 and 2 for our strength-based work. For the conditioning, honestly, it's going to depend on how much boxing he's doing and etc. with that. But typically we're looking at the moment just 1 of those sprint intervals a week directly after one of the strength training sessions. And then we're looking at maybe 2 to 4 extra conditioning sessions potentially. Again, depending a lot on how he responds and the boxing training that he's doing. Then we're into month 3. We're going to call this quote unquote fight camp, 8 weeks out. So the gym transitioning to maximum repeated jumping and plyometry. So if you remember before we were doing single jumps, just 1 box jump or 1 hurdle pop. Now we're into repeated jumps. So it could be continuous hurdle hops. It could be continuous vertical jumps, etc. We can even look to potentially load some jumps, some light dumbbell jumps, single dumbbell jumps here as well. Continuing with our maximal throws, of course. Our oscillatory isometrics, we might start doing more advantageous positions. So top position bench press, could be top position split squat as well. Just being able to get that position, get that speed of contract relax. Again, this is part of our speed and power training without impact. And then continue on with that. Still, you're gonna get some peripheral adaptations with it, but we started with that central. Now we're gonna move to targeting the peripheral adaptations. You're still gonna get some central changes with this, but we can do it with such low volumes and without much fatigue going through. So we're looking at sprint intervals as prescribed by Dr. John Babry and Dr. Andrew Usher. We've touched on this a lot on the channel and on the podcast, so make sure you check those out. We're looking at 2 to 3 sprint intervals a week. And the reason is we can continue to improve time to exhaustion. So being able to extend the time we can do work before fatigue. These adaptations continue to improve at sprint intervals. So far, we've seen 9 weeks within the research. We haven't seen much longer. We see improved mitochondrial function. So mitochondria kicks in earlier to be able to improve recovery. We see improved recovery between sprints as we do these as well, which means we're able to repeat high intensity efforts better within the sport. Also, the volume's so low, there's very little residual fatigue. And when I say low, I'm talking anywhere from 5 minutes to 10 minutes of total conditioning time. That's not even the work time. The work time's even shorter. So the volume's so low that you don't have the residual fatigue carrying over from session to session or day to day, even though straight after doing the intervals, you'll feel completely fucked to not want to do anything, but that subsides relatively quickly. There's also no impact depending on how you do them. So obviously in this context, we would do them no impact, so on a bike. Plus we get the speed power stimulus on top of it. So you're kind of getting a triple whammy through all of this, making it the perfect for this kind of situation. Now, in terms of how it would be set out, I've given these guidelines from Dr. John Babry a lot. 6 to 30 second work intervals. We're looking at 1 to 2 minutes of total work time. So if you're doing 30-second intervals, 4 30-second intervals would be kind of that maximum you would do, whereas 2 of them would be the minimum you would do, if that makes sense. Then we're looking at a 1:2 to 1:8 work to rest ratio. So just some examples, 10 by 6 seconds of work with 30 seconds rest. You can do 10 by 10 seconds with 20 seconds rest. You can do 3 by 30 seconds with 60 seconds rest. You can do 3 by 30 seconds with 2 to 3 minutes rest. These are all just examples you can use. The goal is to be able to change the stimulus relatively often to keep spurring adaptation. And then we get into month 4, say the final 4 weeks of fight camp. Now, again, we don't know if any weight needs to be cut during this time to meet some kind of threshold or not. Regardless, we're just gonna go by assumptions again. So in this month, we would start to transition to once a week strength training in the gym. Now, you can still do twice a week in the gym. There's nothing wrong with that, but you can get away with one and still make progress. So if you can do that and still obviously keep your boxing volume intensity relatively high, you just got more time and energy to put into technical training. Now, if you keep the intensity high, so I'm talking things like a few sets of 1 to 3, and the volume low, you can super compensate, quote unquote, and still make strength, speed, and power gains, even with high sport training loads. And I showed this in my paper that I published in the Journal of Strength Conditioning Research, titled "The Effects of Tapering on Power Force Velocity Profiling and Jump Performance in Professional Rugby League Players." And that's exactly what we did. We just dropped the strength training volume down to once a week, super low volume, high intensity, and we're able to see that big jump in speed, power, and jump performance. So it's something that could be implemented in those final weeks to give you more energy for everything else. And these players were also doing all their on-field conditioning and skills. Regarding the strength training, more of the same: maximal throws, jumps, plyometrics, oscillatory isos, and the low volume strength. The week of the fight will be down to individual preference. Obviously, he's had a whole career doing what he does, so we'll probably just do that. For potentially what you could do in this week, you could do the last sprint intervals earlier in the week, just to give you that final hit out, kind of that final blast, I guess, to feel like you're ready, depending if you're cutting weight or not. You could also do a power primer, say 48 hours out. So say if you're fighting Saturday, it might be on a Thursday. You might do some kind of very, very low volume, high intensity, speed power based session. Could be some kind of jump, throws, some kind of loaded strength work, almost as a way to quote unquote potentiate further down the line, or even just give you confidence going into that fight. So that's how I would lay out 4 months of training for Mike Tyson. Again, no real specifics and sets, reps, and kind of how it would be scheduled in a week, because again, there's so much that goes into that based on so many different factors. But just to give a general overview of how that may look over 4 months, that is how I would see that kind of preparation. And I think the biggest mistake you could do is just go in with full volume and start blasting someone like Mike Tyson with his training background with so much work that he starts to break. But if you enjoyed this, let me know down in the comments. What are your thoughts? Again, my way is not the only way. It is not the best way. There are many ways to do this. This is just kind of my philosophy in a little nutshell. And I'll see you in the next video.